You thought the worst part was how they treated you. It wasn't. The worst part was how quickly you learned to explain it away. You called it stress. You called it trauma. You called it just how they are when they're overwhelmed. But what you never called it until now was abuse. You weren't blind, you were obedient. You weren't naive, you were invested. Invested in the fantasy that if you just gave them enough grace, time, support, love, they'd rise to meet you. They didn't, and they never planned to. Because they knew you'd do the emotional labor for both of you. That's how it works. A narcissist doesn't control you by force. They let you build your own cage, one excuse at a time, one second chance at a time. You defended them harder than they ever defended you. You argued for their intentions while they trampled your reality. You called their cruelty complexity and your suffering growth. You weren't surviving a storm. You were kneeling at the altar of your own denial, and that's what this part is about. Not their behavior, but yours. The loyalty that betrayed you, the silence you called strength, the pain you kept recycling because it still felt like connection. But connection without care is captivity, and you've been held hostage by hope long enough. This isn't about rage, this is about release. Because once you stop arguing for their potential, once you stop writing their apology in your own mind before they even say it, you're free. This is part 2. It's for the ones who've woken up but haven't walked away. For the ones who still replay the good moments like proof that love was real. For the ones who are still crawling emotionally, even if physically they've already left. So if this feels like your reflection, like someone just opened the drawer where you keep all the truths you've been too afraid to say, like this video, share it and subscribe to Victory Stoic. No more performing strength. Now we practice it. In silence, in clarity, in action. And in the comments, drop either your story or declare it with us. I rise, I don't crawl. Because this time, you don't need closure. You need a clean break. And you're not walking out to prove anything. You're walking out because they were never worth the version of you that kept bleeding to keep them comfortable. Let's finish this. Number 6. You think they're unique with you, but it's the same script, different victim. They made you feel like it was all special, like the way they treated you, good or bad, was proof of something deeper, something cosmic, something that couldn't quite be explained. We just have this connection. No one ever made me feel the way you do. You bring out something in me I've never shown anyone. But the truth is simpler, colder, harder to swallow. You weren't special. You were next. What they did to you, they've done before. What they said to you, they've said before. That moment of raw vulnerability when they opened up about how broken they are, recycled. That deep, tragic backstory they told you in month 1 to gain your empathy, word for word what they told the last person. That exact phrase they use when they disappear and come back, I just needed space, but I always come back to you. They used that on 3 people before you. You didn't meet someone mysterious, you met a scriptwriter. And the tragedy is, you were cast without knowing it. What narcissists are masters at isn't love. It's mirroring. They scan for your needs, your wounds, your dreams, and then reflect them back to you like a perfect echo. It feels like chemistry, but it's calculation. It feels personal, but it's pattern. Psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula, one of the leading experts on narcissistic abuse, states that narcissists often deploy the idealized devalue discard cycle, over and over, victim after victim. First, they idealize you. You're amazing, the best thing that's ever happened to them. Then they devalue. Subtle at first, jokes that sting, withheld affection, a shift in tone. Then they discard. Cold silence, absence, blame. And if you try to leave, they hoover. Pull you back in with just enough charm to restart the cycle. You may think, but our connection was different. It wasn't. It only felt different because you were invested. You were emotionally naked, which made the performance more powerful. They didn't change for you. They didn't open up for you. They simply adjusted the costume to fit the stage. Let's talk about real life. Jared, 40, an ER nurse from Colorado, fell hard for someone who seemed magnetic, intense, wounded, poetic. She told him no one ever got her like he did. She said he made her feel safe. Within months, she was alternating between intense affection and silent treatments, gaslighting him about things he knew he said, blaming him for her outbursts. Still, he stayed. Why? Because she said, You bring out my darkest parts, but only because I care so much. When it finally ended, Jared met her previous boyfriend by chance at a friend's wedding. They talked, compared notes, and what he found shattered him. Same backstory, same pet names, same pattern of rage and retreat, same excuses, same exit line. You're too good for me. Jared thought he had been through something unique. He hadn't. He was just one more link in the chain. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned, when someone acts hurtfully, it is not against you. It is simply their nature. You were merely there. This isn't to diminish your experience. It's to free you from the lie that this abuse meant something deep or fated. It didn't. It was not a twisted form of love. It was a rehearsed manipulation, one they've tested and perfected. The reason it hurts so much to accept this is because your suffering feels sacred. And it was, to you. You brought your whole self into it. Your loyalty, your belief in people, your desire to help. But that doesn't mean they matched it. They saw those things as tools, not treasures. So how do you recover from the gut punch of realizing you were just one of many? Step 1. Stop romanticizing the connection. Write a list of things they said or did that made you feel special. Then imagine them saying those same lines to someone else. Because they did. Not hypothetically. Literally. Step 2. Understand this isn't about your worth. It's about their pattern. The fact that they've repeated this cycle doesn't make you foolish. It makes them dangerous. You didn't fail to be enough. You were simply available for a game they already knew how to win. Step 3. Stop looking for closure from someone who repeats roles. They won't tell you the truth because they're already rehearsing their lines for the next act. And the moment you stop giving that truth emotional meaning, you stop bleeding for it. Here's your metaphor. Imagine a magician who performs the same trick in every city. People cry, gasp, believe it's real. But it's not magic. It's choreography. And once you know the trick, it stops working on you. That's where your power is. Not in revenge, not in understanding, but in never being tricked again. The Stoics taught us to return to reason when emotion tries to blind us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. But if they cannot, then I must stay on course." This is your course now. Clarity, detachment, mastery over your mind. You weren't chosen for something special. You were picked for your empathy. And that's not weakness. That's your gift. But from now on, it won't be given to performers. It will be reserved for the real, the consistent, the honest. The script has been exposed. Now step off the stage and stop auditioning for someone who already cast their next role. Number 7. You think it's deep love, but it's just sophisticated emotional manipulation. You called it complicated. You said things like, "It's intense, but that's because it's real. We have our ups and downs, but there's something deep here." You told yourself the chaos was part of the passion, that the confusion, the emotional roller coasters, the pain, meant there was something profound happening between you. Something worth fighting for. But let's tell the truth now. You weren't experiencing depth. You were drowning in distortion. And they weren't deep. They were dangerous. What you thought was complexity was just emotional instability. What you mistook for mystery was evasion, control, and calculated silence. And that magnetic intensity that felt like fate, it was manufactured tension they created just to keep you addicted. You don't have to take this on faith. Behavioral psychology explains it clearly. Narcissists and emotional manipulators use something called push-pull dynamics. Love bombing followed by distance. Warmth followed by coldness. Flattery followed by devaluation. It creates an emotional high-low cycle that releases dopamine in your brain, the same chemical tied to addiction. You get hooked, not on them, but on the constant up and down. The inconsistency becomes the drug, and you call it love. But here's what hurts most. You weren't just being manipulated by them. You were manipulating yourself too. You told yourself, maybe they're just complicated, maybe they feel too much, maybe I'm the one who doesn't get it. You started to believe that your confusion was your fault, that you lacked the insight to understand their pain, their mood swings, their walls, their inconsistencies. But let's be honest. If someone makes you feel like you're too stupid to understand their pain, while never taking responsibility for causing yours, what exactly is there to understand? Here's the brutal truth. They're not deep. They're just good at dressing up dysfunction in poetic language. They know how to say "you don't understand me" in a way that makes you feel guilty instead of insulted. They know how to use vague terms like "my darkness," "my trauma," "my demons" to excuse deliberate cruelty. And you, being empathetic, intelligent, emotionally open, try to decode it all, thinking you're dealing with some tortured soul. You're not. You're dealing with someone who knows exactly how to weaponize your desire to be kind. Let's talk about Rachel, 38, from Boston. She dated a man who was moody, distant, and brilliant with words. He'd send long messages about how broken he felt, how no one ever really saw him, how she was the only one who could. But when she asked for basic emotional consistency, he'd accuse her of being demanding. If she cried, he'd go silent. If she tried to leave, he'd suddenly become poetic again, writing songs, sending journal entries, showing up at her door saying he was ready to be real. She thought she was witnessing emotional depth. In reality, she was caught in a loop of manipulation staged to look profound. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." That's what you're doing, suffering for someone who calls your pain a misunderstanding, and their abuse a tragedy you just don't get. It's not that they're hard to understand, it's that what they're doing is so obvious, you don't want to understand it. Because if you did, you'd have to face it. There's nothing complicated here. There's no hidden genius in their silence, there's no tortured poetry in their rage, there's only control. So what do? Step 1. Stop romanticizing inconsistency. Real love is stable, not theatrical. If it feels like you're in a drama that never ends, you're not in love, you're in a performance you didn't audition for. Step 2. Call manipulation by its name. When they say you're too emotional, what they mean is, I don't want to be held accountable. When they ghost and then return with grand gestures, that's not healing, that's bait. Step 3. Rebuild your definition of love. Write it down. List what healthy love looks and feels like: consistency, honesty, peace, mutual respect. Then ask yourself, honestly, has this relationship ever actually given me that? If not, stop confusing emotional chaos with emotional depth. Here's your metaphor. You thought you were in the deep sea, navigating a vast emotional ocean full of mystery. But really, you were trapped in a dirty fish tank. They tapped the glass, you spun in circles, you called it passion. It was control. Stoicism teaches us to separate what we feel from what is true. Marcus Aurelius said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." You felt like it was deep. But the truth is, it was shallow, manipulative, and designed to confuse you into staying. And now, you don't owe them another moment of analysis. You don't need to understand one more contradiction. You need to walk quietly, cleanly into a life where emotional chaos is no longer mistaken for love. Call it what it is. Don't call poison depth. Number 8, you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a defense mechanism. You think you're having a conversation. You think there's a them in there. Someone rational, someone feeling, someone reachable. You believe if you just find the right words, the right moment, the right tone, you'll finally get through. But what you're actually talking to isn't a human being in dialogue. You're talking to a wall of survival strategies, a defense system built to win, not relate. And here's the most brutal part. You can't reach someone who doesn't want to be known, only obeyed. What you're speaking into isn't intellect. It isn't emotion. It's self-preservation. You're not debating ideas, you're triggering alarms. The moment you say something that threatens their ego, however gently, it sets off an internal panic. And that panic doesn't show up as fear. It shows up as rage, defensiveness, silence, deflection, projection, word salad. And suddenly you're no longer discussing reality. You're in a maze designed to make you feel crazy for even bringing it up. Because the narcissist's core drive isn't understanding, it's dominance. Control. Every conversation is a battleground, whether they raise their voice or not. Even their silence is a weapon. Even their smile can be a trap. They don't listen to connect, they listen to detect. And once they've spotted a threat to their self-image, they don't respond like a human. They react like a shield. Psychologists call this narcissistic defense, a psychological system built to avoid shame at all costs. Every bit of feedback, even the most caring, gets interpreted as attack. Why? Because at their core, narcissists are deeply fragile. They survive not by knowing themselves, but by constructing a false self so inflated, so untouchable, that anything real feels like annihilation. So when you say that hurt me, what they hear is, you're a failure. When you say I need more consistency, they hear you're not enough. When you say, can we talk about this? They hear you're broken. And because they can't tolerate that feeling, they lash back, not to defend the relationship, but to defend the fantasy they live inside. Let's make it real. Kevin, 45, from Phoenix, tried for years to reason with his partner. She was cold, dismissive, and would erupt any time he brought up how he felt. He'd write careful messages, use gentle words, even take responsibility for things that weren't his fault, just to avoid setting her off. But no matter how soft he became, it was never safe. She always found a way to turn it back on him. You're too sensitive. You're always starting drama. Maybe you should work on your tone. Eventually, he realized he was trying to reason with a firewall, not a person. It's like arguing with a panic button. There's no logic to reach, only alarms, only defenses. And the more calm and kind you are, the more disturbing it is when none of it works. Because the human you're trying to reach isn't in the room, only the shell, the mask, the machinery. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." That's the narcissist in a sentence. They already know they're right. They already know you're the problem. They already know how the story ends, with them as the misunderstood hero. So when you come in with evidence, vulnerability, or compassion, they don't receive it as intimacy. They interpret it as weakness, or worse, a trap. And what do? They deflect, deny, or they do something worse. They feign understanding just long enough to keep you invested. Then, right when you relax, they strike again. That's not love. That's emotional warfare by disguise. So what do you do when you realize you're not in conversation, but entrapment? Step 1. Stop negotiating with the mask. The moment you notice the conversation looping, stalling, or turning back on you, stop explaining. Exit. Don't respond to the bait. Don't chase clarity they'll never give. Step 2. Detach from the illusion that they just need help. You've tried, you've been gentle, strong, consistent, patient. If they wanted to meet you halfway, they would have by now. You've done your 999 attempts. The 1000th will be no different, unless it's the one where you stop showing up. Step 3. Reclaim your energy. Journal what you've been repeating. List how many times you've tried to talk it through. Count the times it ended with you doubting yourself. That's your data. That's your proof. And it doesn't lie. Here's the metaphor. You've been trying to open a door that leads to a brick wall, and you keep knocking. Not because it ever opened, but because it once looked like it might. It won't. Because it was never a door. It was a wall disguised as one, and you mistook the echo of your own voice for a conversation. Don't explain one more thing. Don't crawl one more inch. You're not being ignored, you're being scanned, and the only way to win is to stop trying to be heard by someone who was never listening. Number 9. They know you're watching. That's why they pretend to heal. You think they're growing. You think they're finally starting to get it. They're reading the books, saying the right words, talking about therapy, apologizing with better timing, posting quotes about accountability, looking calmer, acting more self-aware. And maybe, just maybe, you feel hope flicker again. Maybe you even whisper to yourself, they're changing. But what you're seeing isn't healing, it's performance. And the audience is you. Narcissists know when you're slipping away. They can sense when your attention starts to fade, when your boundaries firm up, when your silence isn't tactical but final. That's when the show begins. Not because they've had a breakthrough, but because they need to restore your faith in their potential. Not because they've changed, but because they don't want you to. They know your patterns. They know you're the type who listens deeply, who looks for the good, who believes in redemption. They count on that. They don't fear abandonment. They fear losing their grip. So they fake growth, not to improve, but to retain. Retain your belief. Retain your softness. Retain your presence. Because as long as you're watching, you're still in orbit. And as long as you're in orbit, you're still available. This is not speculation. It's science. Dr. Craig Malkin, psychologist and author of Rethinking Narcissism, calls this tactic empathy baiting. It's when narcissists say just enough of what you want to hear, owning small faults, using emotionally intelligent language, promising change to spark hope. But there's no behavioral follow-through. It's all surface, all optics, all meant to reset your doubt before it turns into distance. But here's the catch. The only reason it works is because you want it to. You're not just seeing with your eyes, you're listening with your heart. You feel they're changing. And that's exactly how they trap you again. The Stoic philosopher Cleanthes warned, "The man who gives in to appearances will live in chains." When emotion overrides evidence, when hope blinds logic, you become complicit in your own deception. Narcissists love this, not because you're weak, but because you're wired for empathy. They choose those who confuse emotional intensity with truth, those who can't yet separate how something feels from what it is. Let's make this real. Isaiah 39, a graphic designer from Portland, left his narcissistic ex after 2 years of psychological warfare. 6 weeks later, she started healing. New therapist, new language. Suddenly she was journaling, quoting Brené Brown, saying things like, "I've been reflecting a lot on how I hurt you," he replied. Just once. A door cracked. Within days, the old patterns were back. Minimizing his pain, guilt-tripping, shifting blame. Nothing had changed, just the script. What Isaiah saw wasn't transformation. It was marketing. So what can you do? Step 1. Stop trusting words without action. If someone says, "I'm working on myself," but still uses silence to punish, you're not watching growth. You're watching a rerun. You don't need more promises. You need a track record. Step 2. Anchor yourself in observation, not emotion. Write down what they do, not what they say, not what you hope. Would you believe in their change if you muted the sound and only saw the behavior? Step 3. Let Stoicism guide your lens. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone does wrong, it's their problem, but it becomes yours if you let it distract you." Stop being pulled off course by a play meant to hijack your compassion. Choose your path with reason, not reaction. Here's your metaphor. You're watching a movie they've scripted just for you, and you keep confusing the actor for the role. You know the ending. You've lived it before. They cry, they confess, they grow. Then they hurt you again. Fade to black. This time, don't wait for the twist. Turn off the screen, walk out of the theater. Let their next act happen without an audience, because your healing can't happen while you're still watching theirs. Especially when it's fake. Especially when it's designed to keep you small. You were never meant to orbit their gravity. You were meant to rise beyond it. Number 10. You think you're enduring for love, but you're just holding your breath in a relationship where they control the oxygen. You told yourself this was loyalty, that staying through the worst meant your love was real, that your silence was strength, that your sacrifice was a sign of commitment. But what you were really doing was suffocating, slowly, in a relationship where they decided when you got to breathe. They weren't your partner. They were your air supply. You didn't stay because it felt good. You stayed because once in a while they let you come up for air. That one warm look after 3 days of coldness, that unexpected apology after weeks of blame, that flash of softness that made you forget the sharp edge that came before. It wasn't love, it was emotional asphyxiation, and you convinced yourself you were being strong because you could go longer without oxygen than most. But here's the truth. There's no trophy for holding your breath the longest in a relationship built on tension. There's only damage. To your nervous system, to your dignity, to your sense of reality. Narcissists are masters of scarcity psychology. It's a well-documented tactic. They give just enough to make you stay, but never enough to make you feel full. They don't flood you with love, they ration it. And because the moments of warmth are so rare, so fleeting, they feel divine when they come. That's the trap. Dr. Joe Dispenza, a neuroscientist who studies emotion and trauma, explains that intermittent emotional reward creates a high dopamine spike, stronger than consistent positive reinforcement. In plain terms, when they finally come back around, you feel addicted to the relief, not the person, the relief. And that's what keeps you hooked, not connection, withdrawal. Let's make this painfully clear with someone real. Anna, 31, from Seattle, was with a man who never yelled, never hit, never called her names, but he had a way of disappearing emotionally. If she brought up a concern, he'd go cold. If she asked for more affection, he'd say she was too needy. For every moment of closeness, there were 10 of distance. and every time she started pulling away, he warmed up just enough to make her stay. She thought, this is just how he loves. I need to be patient. But what she was really doing was holding her breath for weeks at a time, waiting for a man who fed her oxygen like a miser feeds scraps to a starving animal. The Stoics would call this what it is, voluntary slavery. Seneca wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than he must." And you? You're suffering by choice now, not because you want to, but because you think the pain proves something valuable. But it doesn't. You've confused endurance with devotion. You've called your emotional depletion loyalty. You've mistaken your silence for peace. So what do? Step 1. Call it what it is. Write it down. No poetry, no soft language. Not he's emotionally distant. Call it withholding. Not she's just moody. Call it emotional manipulation. Step 2. Track the pattern. Make a chart. When are you getting oxygen? Is it predictable? Does it come right after you threaten to leave or right before a special occasion? That's not love, that's a system. Narcissists run systems. Step 3. Breathe without them, literally. Take 3 long inhales right now. Practice the feeling of filling your own lungs. Your nervous system has been hijacked to associate relief with their behavior. Rewire it. Find breath, space, stillness outside their reach. Here's the metaphor. You're underwater, and they're holding the valve. Sometimes they open it, sometimes they don't, and every time they do, you thank them like they saved your life. But what you've forgotten is, you can get out of the pool. You were never meant to survive someone. You were meant to thrive beside someone. Love shouldn't feel like gasping. It should feel like breathing fully, with no one holding the valve but you. Number 11. Every time you submit, you cement the lower ground they assigned you. They don't have to shout to dominate you. They don't have to insult you, belittle you, or raise a hand. They've trained you to take the lower ground voluntarily. And every time you bend to keep the peace, every time you swallow your voice, soften your tone, backtrack on your boundaries, you reinforce exactly what they've always believed. You belong beneath them. They don't push you down. You sit down. You offer them the higher seat, not because they earned it, but because you've convinced yourself it's safer there. You're not in a relationship. You're in a hierarchy, one where they reign and you perform submission dressed as maturity. You say you're being the bigger person. But the truth is, you've been shrinking for so long, you now call that shape you. It didn't start with one moment. It started with many. Letting them have the last word, even when they were wrong. Apologizing first, even when you were the one bleeding. Backing off during arguments because they might explode. Smiling when you wanted to scream. You call it compromise. But compromise isn't when one person yields constantly and the other gets to set the temperature of the relationship every day. You've become, in every sense, a trained animal. Not in a home, but in a ring. A circus act. Responding to cues, gauging tone, adjusting behavior not based on what's right, but based on what keeps things quiet. Psychologist Harriet Lerner, in The Dance of Anger, calls this pattern over-functioning, where one person takes on emotional labor, regulation, responsibility to compensate for the other person's instability. That's what you've been doing, carrying both your peace and theirs. And every time you do that, they learn. I can stay exactly as I am. They'll bend. The Stoic philosopher Hierocles warned, to allow insult without protest is not virtue, it is surrender. There's a dangerous myth in modern relationships that silence is strength. But silence, when it comes from fear, isn't strength. It's submission. And the more you bite your tongue to avoid conflict, the more they taste control. Let's bring this home. Marcus, 44, an attorney in Chicago, had a partner who weaponized moods like a conductor directs an orchestra. If he expressed frustration, she'd freeze him out. If he set a boundary, she'd cry or rage. So he learned, be gentle, don't push, don't escalate. Over time, he stopped talking about what he wanted. Then he stopped wanting things altogether, not because he changed, but because he was trained. And that's the part that burns the most. Not that they took power, that you handed it to them, piece by piece, thinking it was love, thinking it was wisdom. So how do you reclaim it? Step 1. Recognize your silence as a strategy of survival, not peace. Stop calling it noble. You weren't avoiding conflict, you were avoiding consequences. Step 2. Break the ritual. Do one thing differently. Say what you actually mean. Don't soften your language. Don't pre-apologize. Just once. Refuse to bow. You'll feel the fear rise. Do it anyway. That's how power begins. Step 3. Redraw the emotional terrain. In your mind, write down where you've placed yourself in the relationship hierarchy. Be honest. Then, next to it, write where you actually belong. That delta? That's the work. Here's your metaphor. You think you're keeping peace by staying low, but you're just a lion trained to sit on a stool. Not because you lost your strength, but because you've been punished every time you stood up. Well, stand up anyway. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them rage. Let them withdraw. Your silence bought you nothing but chains. Now try your voice. Try your height. And remember, if someone only feels safe when you're beneath them, they were never worthy of standing beside you. Conclusion. You were never meant to bow. You were meant to break the stage. This was never a love story. It was a rehearsal. And the only role you were allowed to play was the one that stayed quiet, small, useful. You thought you were the co-star. In truth, you were the prop. You were handed a script full of silence, self-blame, submission. Every time you spoke your truth, the lights dimmed. Every time you asked for more, the director yelled cut. But the show is over now, and you, bleeding, breathless, disoriented, are still here. Not because they gave you space to grow, but because somewhere inside you, there was a voice that never stopped whispering, "This isn't love, this is a leash." So here we are, at the end of this video, but not the end of your war. Because now comes the part they always feared. The part where you don't explain, where you don't negotiate, where you don't wait for closure or promise or praise. You just walk off the stage they built to contain you. And when the curtain drops, you don't look back to see if they noticed. You already know they did. That silence of yours? It's the first real monologue you've ever delivered, and it lands harder than any scream. So now, the next step is yours. You don't need them to change. You don't need to win the last argument. You need to rise, not as a survivor of their abuse, but as a sovereign force who no longer auditions for people who only clap when you bow. If this video stripped something false out of you, if it hit a place you've been avoiding for too long, like it, share it with someone still whispering under their breath when they deserve to roar, and subscribe to Victory Stoic. This isn't therapy. This is a battlefield debriefing, and you've just been handed your exit orders. In the comments, drop your story or claim your breath back with our war cry. I rise, I don't crawl. Because they'll keep performing the same tricks for their next audience. They'll recite the same lines, they'll bait the next believer. But you've learned to walk out of the theater. You've learned the most dangerous act of all, living well, with no spotlight, no apology, and no chains. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And most of all, thank you for refusing to kneel ever again.